My brothers, my sisters, welcome back to the channel. Today we speak not just of Burkina Faso, but of Africa's awakening. If you believe in freedom, unity, and the power of our people, then make sure you subscribe. Share this story, and let the world hear Africa's voice. Because what you are about to witness is not just history, but is destiny. A world consumed by fire. Across continents, screens flicker with the same unbearable image. Cities in ruin, skies blackened by smoke, and the cries of children swallowed by rubble. The headlines call it defiance, the people call it genocide. And in the silence between explosions, something far older stirs. The quiet judgment of conscience itself. The year is shadowed by hypocrisy. Powerful nations justify horror in the name of order, and empires built on centuries of blood pretend to forget their own reflection. In the middle of it all, a single man in West Africa stands at the edge of a moral abyss. Ibrahim Traoré, leader of Burkina Faso, the youngest head of state on the continent. The soldier who rose from dust and duty now faces the most dangerous request of his life. In a closed-door message carried through encrypted channels, a plea arrives. Benjamin Netanyahu, surrounded by condemnation and isolation, reaches out to the one man whose voice still carries moral weight in a broken world. He does not ask for troops. He asks for silence, for the silence of Africa, for the silence of the oppressed. And as the world burns, Traoré must decide between the survival of his small nation or the integrity of his soul. The narration slows, thunder rolling faintly over the savannah. The sky is heavy, unmoving, as if holding its breath. When the world's most powerful man begged for silence, Traoré gave him an answer that shook humanity. Burkina Faso. Dawn breaks pale over a nation haunted by memory. In the early morning haze, men and women move through markets with baskets of dust-covered grain. The wind carries the scent of metal, diesel, and earth. Children chase each other through alleys still lined with bullet holes from the years of insurgency. For them, peace is not an era. It is a pause between storms. Traoré walks through the corridors of his modest presidential compound. The walls bare except for one portrait, Thomas Sankara, the revolutionary ghost who dreamed of African self-reliance. The resemblance between them is uncanny, not in face, but in spirit. He had once vowed to finish what Sankara began, to break the chains of dependency, to restore dignity. But now dignity feels expensive, too expensive for a country where hunger has become a language everyone understands. The IMF's shadow looms large over Ouagadougou. Sanctions, withheld loans, frozen accounts, all reminders that independence is a dangerous illusion. The price of defiance is isolation. The cost of silence, survival. The global crisis deepens. In Gaza, in Rafah, in cities reduced to ash, the world watches through their screens. Protests erupt in Africa, South America, Europe. Placards rise. Stop the genocide. Free the oppressed. And yet, in the echo chambers of power, every word is twisted. Traoré feels the pressure closing in. The same Western envoys who once warned him about coups now arrive with smiles too wide, bearing offers wrapped in subtle threats. Stay neutral, they say. Focus on development. In other words, stay silent. At night, Traoré doesn't sleep much. He watches footage. Civilians trapped beneath debris. Children with dust-coated faces staring into cameras that will forget them tomorrow. He wonders if his silence would make him complicit. But his ministers, his generals, his people, they whisper of fear. They whisper of hunger. Burkina Faso depends on trade, on aid, on invisible agreements that keep food on tables. One wrong statement, one moral outburst, and the markets collapse. He remembers how quickly they punished others before. Outside his window, the city lights flicker and fade under rolling blackouts. The generators hum like a distant war drum. Every decision feels like a noose. A week later, a message arrives, encrypted, marked urgent. Not through official diplomatic channels, but through intermediaries, private security firms, European contacts, oil liaisons. It bears a signature, Office of the Prime Minister of Israel, Traoré reads it twice. It is not a threat, not yet. It is an invitation. A meeting. For peace, it says. For cooperation. But he understands the subtext. The plea is simple. Lend moral support to Israel, or remain silent while their war rages on. In return, millions in development aid, advanced weaponry, international protection against future sanctions, temptation wrapped in diplomacy. A deal that could strengthen his fragile nation, or destroy everything he stands for. As days pass, the pressure tightens. African leaders are divided. Some issue vague statements. Others bend under pressure. But the youth, the street voices, the artists, the activists, look to Traoré. They chant his name in rallies, paint his face on walls, calling him Africa's last conscience. He never asked for that title. But now it defines him. Inside his war room, maps of the Sahel cover the walls. Red zones mark territories under threat from rebels, insurgents funded by invisible hands. Traoré knows that some of those hands belong to the same nations urging him to stay neutral. Neutrality is not peace. Neutrality is submission. Still, he hesitates. Because the ones who will suffer first are not the powerful. They are his people. Farmers already struggling with drought. Children already dying from malnutrition. In private, his closest advisor warns him, if you speak out, they'll destroy our economy. They'll cut us off. And for a moment, the young captain who became president feels the weight of an impossible equation. Morality versus survival. Then the footage leaks. Unfiltered. Unedited. A journalist's smuggled video showing what polite headlines refuse to describe. Bodies lined in streets. Aid workers crying. Entire families erased. The clip spreads like wildfire across the world and through Burkina Faso's capital. Students march through the avenues chanting, "We will not be silent." Protests swell. The old flag of African unity reappears on banners, and among the chants, one question echoes through the air. Where is Traoré? In that question lies the storm. He knows the next step. To the world, the meeting is a secret, but to history, it will not be. As dusk settles, a convoy of unmarked vehicles rolls toward a remote airstrip outside Ouagadougou. The air is thick with dust and secrecy. The sky burns orange, the color of blood diluted by sunset. Some meetings change the course of nations. Others decide the fate of humanity. A private jet touches down, its insignia covered, its passengers unseen. Somewhere within, a man known for his iron will steps onto African soil, not to conquer, but to plead. And as Traoré watches from a distance, his expression is unreadable, somewhere between fury and sorrow. He knows what this is. It's not diplomacy. It's a test of conscience. The screen fades to black. He came asking for support, but what he received was something the world was not prepared to hear. The runway hums beneath the weight of engines cooling in the night air. The jet sits in silence, its silver skin reflecting faint moonlight like a blade waiting to be drawn. Dust curls around the convoy as it stops, headlights cutting through the dark. Armed guards take position. No flags, no cameras, no announcements, only secrecy and intent. Inside a nearby compound built for discreet diplomacy, Ibrahim Traoré waits. His uniform is unadorned, his expression unreadable. Outside, cicadas sing against the stillness. Every sound feels amplified. The ticking of a wall clock, the low hum of generators, the faint echo of footsteps approaching. The visitor has arrived. They call it a private humanitarian discussion. But both men know what this meeting truly is, a transaction of silence. Far beyond the compound, the world churns. In Europe and the US, press briefings spin narratives of self-defense. In Gaza, lights go out one neighborhood at a time. Networks cut live feeds before the screams finish. Aid convoys burn on desert roads. And in Ouagadougou, power flickers as the government diverts its last reserves of electricity to keep communication lines alive. Every decision, every word uttered tonight will ripple across that fragile balance. Burkina Faso's ministers wait anxiously. No one dares to speak too loud, afraid that walls might listen. Rumors spread. Some say Traoré will side with the West. Others whisper he's planning something unthinkable. A continent holds its breath. In cities from Accra to Nairobi, street screens show protests swelling against the war. People raise their phones, chanting in unison, "Africa will not be silent!" But governments remain cautious, their statements careful, sterile. They've seen what happens to nations that defy the world's strongest lobbies: isolation, sanctions, starvation. Still, the people believe in Traoré. His silence so far has not been cowardice, it has been calculation. Inside his compound, Traoré stands by a window overlooking the dark runway. He watches the small lights of the foreign jet glimmer in the distance. Somewhere deep within, conflict tears at him. The soldier's instinct to defend, and the leader's burden to protect his nation from collapse. He knows this night will mark him forever. 3 days earlier, he had received a sealed dossier. Inside, intelligence briefings, satellite images, names of journalists who vanished after reporting war crimes. It wasn't from Israel or from any Western power. It was anonymous, but its message was clear. Someone wanted him to know the truth before the meeting. Photos of children beneath collapsed concrete. Aerial footage of neighborhoods turned into dust. Hospitals without roofs. The images refused to leave his mind. In the hours that followed, Traoré barely spoke. His staff described him as haunted. He ordered his communications team to suspend all statements until further notice. He wasn't preparing for diplomacy. He was preparing for a confrontation. The convoy doors open. Figures in dark suits step out, flanked by armed guards. Their faces are stern, exhausted. Men accustomed to manipulation, not to resistance. Among them walks Benjamin Netanyahu, his gaze sharp, movements deliberate, his presence commanding even in secrecy. They shake hands. Cameras would have called it a historic gesture, two worlds meeting. But there are no cameras here, only the faint hum of air conditioning and the low pulse of tension. Documents are laid on a polished table. Charts, proposals, and promises. Economic aid, defense cooperation, infrastructure investments, all disguised as humanitarian support. But beneath the ink lies something darker, a clause demanding silence, support in exchange for moral blindness. As the meeting unfolds, time slows. Traoré listens. He studies Netanyahu's words not for meaning, but for motive. The proposals are tempting. Billions in infrastructure funds, trade routes reopened, IMF relief through Israeli mediation. He can already imagine the relief on his people's faces if hunger eases. He can see markets filled again, schools reopened, roads rebuilt. All he has to do is sign, or simply say nothing. But his conscience whispers louder than the offer. He remembers the footage, the dust, the lifeless arms of children. And he feels the shadow of Sankara, the man who once said, "He who feeds you controls you." Outside, the night deepens. In the streets of Ouagadougou, crowds still gather. They do not know what is happening behind these walls, but they can sense history bending. Inside the compound, a storm brews in silence. Traoré's ministers whisper among themselves in the adjacent room. Some urge caution, accept the deal, survival first. Others urge defiance. This is not aid, it's moral surrender. Their voices blur into a chorus of fear. They all know what happened to leaders who refused before. Coups, sanctions, assassinations disguised as accidents. A foreign advisor leans close to one of the ministers, muttering through a translator. His tone is soft but poisoned. The world won't remember a poor man's morality, but it will remember his hunger. It's not advice, it's a warning. The hours stretch into midnight. Traoré steps outside for air, the desert wind carrying whispers through the trees. He looks toward the faint lights of Ouagadougou, imagining the millions asleep, unaware that their future balances on a decision no one will vote for. He closes his eyes. He thinks of the villages he visited months ago, mothers feeding their children half portions, farmers waiting for rain that never comes. He thinks of how every choice he makes ripples into the lives of people who trust him blindly. And yet, he knows. What is being asked of him tonight is not just political. It's spiritual betrayal. A deal made over the graves of the innocent can never bring peace. Inside the meeting hall, the atmosphere grows heavier. Netanyahu's envoys sense hesitation. They shift tactics, invoking fear, survival, global alliances. They promise protection from instability. They speak of security cooperation. But beneath every word lies a silent command: do not oppose us. The African president says little, his silence unnerving them more than any argument could. Every minute he doesn't respond, the illusion of control slips further from their grasp. One envoy, frustrated, whispers to another, he's not taking it. He's thinking of the cameras, of the people. But Traoré isn't thinking of cameras. He's thinking of truth, and how truth once spoken cannot be buried again. Beyond the compound walls, strange events begin to unfold. A journalist known for investigating foreign interference in Africa's gold markets disappears overnight. A senior army officer, one known for opposing Western influence, dies in what is reported as a vehicle malfunction. The message is clear. Someone, somewhere, is watching. Still, Traoré does not yield. He orders tighter security. He sends encrypted messages to trusted allies, not for defense, but for witnesses. If anything happens to him, the world must know why. The air around him feels electric, not from fear, but from purpose. The meeting continues for hours. Discussions blur into veiled threats. Netanyahu's envoys, growing restless, attempt persuasion through emotion, invoking shared struggles, security concerns, history. They forget that Africa remembers everything. Its scars are not erased by sympathy. Traoré's expression hardens. The silence turns unbearable. The foreign delegation senses the tone shifting, like a current reversing direction. In that stillness, something begins to change, not in politics, but in posture. It's the moment before confrontation, when conviction starts to outweigh consequence. The sun will soon rise over Burkina Faso. The guards outside check their weapons, unaware of the weight of what's happening inside. In the air, there's a heaviness that feels historic, a quiet before the tremor. Traoré returns to the table. His hand brushes the documents laid before him. The ink glistens under the dim lights. He sees the line that demands silence, that small, monstrous sentence that would erase the voice of an entire continent. He pushes the papers away. A silence deeper than any sound fills the room. No one speaks, but everyone understands. Outside, the first light of dawn cuts across the horizon, sharp, golden, defiant. The meeting isn't over, but something irreversible has begun. The sun rises slow over Ouagadougou, a pale, trembling light that does not yet know what it will illuminate. Inside the compound, the air feels heavier than before. The walls seem to breathe with the weight of what was almost agreed to. The papers still lie on the table, the ink smudged, the clauses unread, the promises unopened. In that stillness, two worlds face each other. One speaks the language of control, the other, the language of conscience. A silence deeper than night fills the room. Every movement is slow. Every breath is calculated. Traoré sits upright, the exhaustion invisible behind a soldier's discipline. Netanyahu, composed but tense, studies him. Between them, the table becomes a border, not of geography but of morality. Outside, the city begins to wake. Motorbikes hum through the streets. Market vendors lift their tarps. Children chase each other through alleys lined with dust and hope. None of them know that their leader stands inside a room that could decide the fate of their tomorrow. News has already started to leak. Anonymous sources report that a high-level meeting took place between Israel and Burkina Faso. The global media swirls with speculation. Is Traoré shifting alliances? In London, Washington, and Paris, diplomats whisper anxiously. Some are relieved. Others fear something unpredictable, something defiant. The meeting resumes behind closed doors. Documents are rearranged, offers sweetened, but Traoré's expression has changed. He no longer listens for negotiation. He listens for truth hidden between their words. He sees desperation disguised as diplomacy. He sees power trembling beneath the mask of confidence. The Israeli delegation grows uneasy. They sense his patience thinning. The envoy leading the discussion leans forward, his tone low and urgent, speaking of strategic partnership, of shared security threats. But Traoré no longer hears them. He hears the echo of another truth, the cries of the innocent. A small bead of sweat rolls down the envoy's temple. He realizes the rhythm of this meeting has shifted. They no longer control the tempo. Traoré rises from his chair. He moves toward the window, the light cutting across his face. Beyond the compound walls, the horizon glows with that unmistakable African gold. Fierce, unbending, untamed. His gaze hardens. The choice is clear now. It was always clear. He turns back to the table, each step deliberate, echoing against marble like distant drums. The documents sit before him, the same way temptations sit before every man who ever had the chance to sell his soul. He doesn't touch them. Instead, he lets the silence linger, long enough for the envoys to feel it crawl under their skin. A silence not of hesitation but of judgment. Beyond the walls, the world begins to react before the decision is even made. On African social media, rumors spread like wildfire. Traoré met Netanyahu last night. Some condemn him, others defend him. But all wait for the truth. In the streets, protests grow, not violent but determined. Placards rise. Africa will not be silent. Burkina Faso stands for humanity. The chants rise through the city, carried by wind and belief. Inside the room, those chants are invisible, but their echo is felt. Even the foreign envoys can sense it, the trembling of a continent refusing to bow. For Netanyahu, this was supposed to be a quiet meeting, a diplomatic correction, a reassurance that Africa's voice could be contained. But he miscalculated something ancient, the spirit that had been buried too long beneath centuries of extraction, debt, and submission. He expected compliance. What he finds is conviction. Traoré's refusal isn't loud. It isn't theatrical. It's simply undeniable. And yet, his silence says everything. Africa will not endorse genocide. An aide quietly approaches Netanyahu, whispering into his ear. He nods, his jaw tightening. His entourage begins packing their files. The envoys avoid eye contact. The rhythm of power has reversed. In the corner, a single bulb flickers, a small, fragile light refusing to die. It casts shadows that move like restless ghosts across the room. For a moment, it feels as if time itself pauses, watching. This is the instant history bends. A leader of one of the poorest nations on earth just denied the demands of one of the most powerful. The consequences will be brutal, but the world will remember. Outside, a gust of hot desert wind slams against the compound's gates, sending dust swirling through the air. The guards shield their eyes. Somewhere in the distance, thunder murmurs, faint, uncertain. The convoy prepares to leave. The engines roar to life. The smell of aviation fuel mixes with the dust. Netanyahu exits the building, his face composed but drained. Cameras won't capture this, but history will. As his motorcade disappears into the horizon, Traoré remains inside, staring at the empty chairs. The silence left behind feels both heavy and pure. In the hours that follow, everything unravels. International media outlets scramble for statements. Government spokesmen deny, deflect, and distort. Preliminary discussions on cooperation, they say. Nothing political, they insist, but people know better. Something in Traoré's absence from public view feels deliberate, a preparation for a message far greater than any press release. The markets begin to tremble. Investors panic. Western envoys withdraw quietly. Sanctions are whispered in conference rooms. Yet in Africa, a new energy begins to move. Across Ghana, Mali, Senegal, Kenya, people gather in squares, lighting candles for Gaza, chanting Traoré's name. Not as a savior, but as a symbol. For the first time in decades, Africa's moral voice has pierced through the noise. Night falls again over Ouagadougou. Traoré stands alone in his office, the city shimmering faintly through the window. He knows the storm that's coming. The economic retaliation, the political isolation, the media attacks. But his heart feels light. He's done what so few ever dared to do. He refused to trade integrity for convenience. On his desk lies a single note written in his own hand earlier that day, a reminder to himself. The measure of a nation is not its wealth, but what it refuses to tolerate. He folds the paper and tucks it into his coat pocket. Outside, the people continue chanting into the night. The sound grows into something transcendent, not anger, not protest, but awakening. Fires burn in metal drums, casting orange light across faces filled with belief. The city feels alive, trembling with the birth of something it can't yet name. A wind rises through the streets, scattering banners, lifting voices. The air carries the scent of dust and rain, the promise of a storm that cleanses. And above it all, the voice of a continent emerges, defiant, wounded, hopeful. Africa is watching. The world is listening, and one man's refusal has become an anthem. Rain falls over Jerusalem. Not a storm, not a flood, just enough to blur the view of the Knesset's tall walls, to smear the city's reflections across its stone streets. Inside, emergency meetings are being held. No one will speak it aloud, but everyone knows something has changed. The reports from Africa are worse than expected. Burkina Faso's refusal has sparked a chain reaction. Statements are spreading like wildfire. Mali, Niger, Guinea. Then, astonishingly, South Africa issues a declaration of support for Traoré's stance, calling it a moment of moral clarity for the global South. The foreign ministry rooms fall silent. Israel's diplomats argue strategy, messaging, damage control, but the words feel hollow. The world has seen a man say no to them and stand tall after it. The shock is not in the refusal itself. It's in the conviction behind it. In Ouagadougou, the air hums with disbelief and pride. Every newspaper headline carries the same image. Traoré standing alone at the table, the papers untouched before him, his eyes calm, his face set. He said nothing, and the world heard everything. By morning, the clip circulates everywhere. Grainy footage leaked from inside the compound shows Netanyahu's team leaving, their faces unreadable. The internet gives it names: the silent rejection, Africa's stand, the moment of defiance. It doesn't take long for the world to choose sides. Across Western media, the tone is sharp. Commentators call Traoré reckless, uninformed, a populist in uniform. But in the global South, it's different. In Cairo, students chant his name during protests. In Accra, murals appear overnight, Traoré's silhouette against a burning sun. The words, "We are awake." In Johannesburg, activists raise the Palestinian flag alongside Burkina Faso's, declaring, "Africa remembers who she is." The African Union calls an emergency session. For the first time in years, the discussion feels alive, unfiltered, raw, uncoordinated. Some leaders urge caution, others demand unity. When Traoré's name is mentioned, the chamber fills with applause. He doesn't attend. He watches from a small room with his advisors, his uniform jacket folded neatly beside him, wearing a simple white shirt. His eyes are tired, but his voice is steady. "They'll try to isolate us, let them." The people are no longer silent, the room nods. There is no fear here, just readiness. In Paris, the French Foreign Ministry releases a statement condemning the manipulation of African sovereignty by anti-Western narratives. In Washington, officials downplay the event, a misunderstanding of diplomatic protocol. But in Tel Aviv, anger brews quietly. Behind closed doors, Netanyahu's advisors review intelligence reports on Burkina Faso's alliances, trade routes, and possible partners. They see the name Russia more than once, and Mali, and China. The West feels it too, the tremor of a world shifting beneath its feet. Then comes the retaliation. Aid is suspended. Contracts are reviewed. Sanctions are whispered into existence through bureaucratic language. Temporary adjustments, conditional cooperation, review of eligibility. Burkina Faso's currency drops overnight. Fuel prices surge. Imports are delayed at ports. But the people, they don't fold. Instead, something unexpected happens. Communities rally together. Volunteers distribute food. Local industries rise to fill gaps left by foreign companies. And a new slogan appears across markets and school walls. If they won't trade with us, we'll build our own. Weeks pass. A new press conference is announced. The world watches. Traoré stands before a simple podium. No flags behind him, no teleprompters. Just him. A soldier in uniform, his beret tucked beneath his arm. He speaks with calm precision. We are not against Israel. We are against oppression. We are not rejecting the world. We are rejecting silence. We will not trade dignity for convenience. The room erupts. Not in chaos, in thunderous applause. Within hours, that quote floods every platform. It's translated into dozens of languages. Even those who oppose him are forced to admit the man speaks with conviction. Meanwhile, the ripples reach unexpected places. In Gaza, survivors hold small radios close to their ears, listening to fragments of his words. In refugee camps across the region, his name becomes a symbol of solidarity. In universities across the West, young activists start quoting him, drawing parallels between colonialism, occupation, and resistance. In one viral clip, a student in London declares at a rally, "When they silence one voice, another rises." When they silence a continent, it shouts louder, but not everyone celebrates. Inside his government, pressure builds. Economists warn of instability. Advisors urge moderation. Foreign agents stir disinformation campaigns, planting rumors of coup attempts, of hidden motives, of corruption. The tension thickens. At night, Traoré sits by the window of the presidential residence, looking at the faint lights across the capital. The sound of the muezzin's call echoes softly through the distance. He knows the path ahead is dangerous, but every revolution demands a price. He murmurs under his breath, "They'll come for me." But they'll never erase the message. Then comes the unexpected twist. The United Nations calls for an emergency session to discuss the deterioration of relations between Israel and African states. Representatives from 45 nations attend. The cameras are live. When the Burkina Faso delegate takes the floor, the hall falls quiet. He doesn't deliver a long speech. He simply reads Traoré's line aloud, "We will not trade dignity for convenience." The room bursts into murmurs. Some clap, others walk out. But history again records the silence that follows. Days later, a confidential memo leaks. It reveals that several African nations, including Senegal, Chad, and Tanzania, are forming a new bloc to review their international alignments, focusing on independent trade and moral diplomacy. The headline reads, "Africa redefines neutrality from passive to powerful." For decades, neutrality meant invisibility. Now it means strength. In the background, Netanyahu faces growing dissent. Some of his allies accuse him of losing diplomatic ground. Opposition leaders call it the beginning of an isolation that no propaganda can repair. In one interview, a journalist bluntly asks, "Did you underestimate Africa?" He pauses, his expression unreadable. "We underestimated everyone." The clip goes viral. Weeks turn into months. The storm of media coverage slowly fades. But something fundamental remains altered. In classrooms, in rallies, in political discussions, people speak differently now. The question has shifted from "can we resist?" to "what happens if we all do?" That is the power of defiance. It multiplies in silence. One night, back in Ouagadougou, a crowd gathers outside the presidential palace. Thousands stand beneath the stars holding candles. When Traoré steps out onto the balcony, the sea of light stretches as far as he can see. He says nothing. He simply raises his hand. The crowd answers with a single chant that shakes the air. "Africa will not kneel." It rolls through the city like thunder. Children join. Elders cry. Drummers beat rhythms older than borders. In that moment, something ancient returns. The pulse of dignity rediscovered. Far away, in newsrooms and boardrooms, analysts dismiss it as symbolism. But those who've seen history repeat know. Every empire falls first in the heart, then in the economy. The seeds are planted now, deep in the red soil of a continent that has remembered itself. And as dawn approaches over Burkina Faso, the city glows again. Not with wealth, but with pride. Not with power, but with purpose. The defiance that began with one quiet refusal has become a roar. And somewhere, in that growing chorus of nations, one truth echoes louder than ever. The world's smallest voices are no longer silent. The dust of outrage settles, but its echo endures. Weeks fade into months. Sanctions tighten, currencies struggle, headlines shift. Yet one name refuses to disappear from the global conversation: Ibrahim Traoré. What began as a quiet refusal has turned into a movement. A shift in the moral center of the world. A single act of courage that fractures decades of submission and fear. Across Africa, the sentiment is no longer one of survival, but of awakening. In Dakar, graffiti appears on the cracked walls of old colonial buildings. "We are not your markets, we are your equals." In Nairobi, students stage hunger strikes outside foreign embassies, chanting for real independence, not financial puppetry. In Bamako, old veterans of past coups march with pride again, carrying the Burkina Faso flag alongside their own. In each chant, in every whisper, the rhythm is the same. A rhythm older than empire, louder than war, dignity before bread. Meanwhile, the economic pressure intensifies. IMF envoys circulate quietly through West Africa, offering new packages and partnerships, their words polished but hollow. Most leaders accept, a few hesitate. But Traoré, he refuses to attend any of the meetings. Instead, he appears on state television one night, unannounced. His tone is calm, steady, yet it carries the weight of centuries. "They say we are poor, but our soil is gold. Our hands are strong. Our people are alive. Let them take their loans. We will take our freedom." The broadcast lasts only 6 minutes. But in those 6 minutes, the world stops scrolling. By morning, his words become scripture in the eyes of the youth. TikToks, songs, murals, and documentaries erupt online. A Burkina Faso rapper uploads a track titled "We Owe Nothing," and within days it becomes the anthem of a new generation. Children memorize his speech like a prayer. Mothers tell their sons that courage doesn't come from wealth, but from truth. In Europe, the narrative begins to fracture. Commentators grow uneasy. Some describe Traoré as dangerous. Others, quietly, cautiously, call him necessary, even among his critics. There's a reluctant acknowledgement. The man has forced the world to look in a mirror it spent decades avoiding. At the UN, silence breaks. A motion is raised to investigate war crimes in Gaza. Dozens of African and Latin American nations sign in support. For the first time, the Global South doesn't just vote, it leads. Behind the motion stands an unspoken ghost, Traoré's refusal. No one says it aloud, but everyone knows. This wave began in Ouagadougou, in that quiet room where one man refused to bow. Back home, life remains hard, prices rise. Fuel remains scarce, the burden of defiance weighs heavy, but something invisible sustains the people, a fire that doesn't burn out. Markets reopen with local crafts.
Farmers organize cooperatives.
Engineers start building microgrids powered by solar panels instead of waiting for aid. The national anthem sounds different now, louder, truer, heavier with meaning. In the villages, elders call it Sankara's ghost smiling again. Then comes the moment that changes history once more. Months after his defiant meeting, the African Union holds a landmark summit in Addis Ababa. Traoré is invited as a keynote speaker. The hall is filled. Journalists, presidents, diplomats, soldiers. He steps onto the stage in his simple military uniform. No medals, no notes. The audience quiets. Cameras roll. He begins. Africa was taught that silence keeps peace. But silence fed change. We were told to wait for aid. But aid became our leash. We waited so long we forgot our own voice. Today we speak again, not in anger but in truth. He pauses. The hall is still. A nation that says no to injustice does not fall. It rises. And if the price of standing is isolation, then let us be alone but free. Thunderous applause fills the air. Delegates stand, some cry. Even those who once doubted him feel something shift inside them. The next day, headlines roar. A new era begins in Africa. Traoré redefines leadership. History repeats, but this time, it's not Europe writing it. But history has its shadows too. Western think tanks release reports accusing Traoré of geopolitical adventurism. Anonymous sources leak documents claiming foreign influence behind his decisions. The machine of propaganda spins again, yet this time it fails to bite. People no longer believe everything they're told. They've seen too much. Back in Israel, Netanyahu faces growing unrest. International pressure mounts. Protests spread. He stands at a podium one night, trying to defend policies no longer defensible. Behind him, screens flicker with images of protests in Africa, flags waving, chants rising. He pauses mid-sentence, his expression momentarily breaking. Even he knows, The tide has turned, the world has changed, and it will not go back. Weeks later, in a small corner of Ouagadougou, Traoré visits a school built by local volunteers. Children rush to him, some barefoot, some carrying old notebooks. One little girl, no older than 8, raises her hand. "Will they stop us again?" she asks. He kneels beside her, smiling gently. "Only if we stop believing we can stand." The girl nods slowly. Then she grins. "We won't stop." As he leaves, the sun breaks through the clouds. The air feels lighter, not because the struggle is over, but because hope has finally learned to live alongside hardship. That's what Traoré has built. Not a perfect country, but an unbreakable spirit. Years pass. Historians will later write that 2025 was the year the moral geography of the world shifted. When the smallest nation refused the biggest pressure, when one voice redefined the balance of power. Documentaries will replay that moment again and again. The image of Traoré sitting across from Netanyahu. Papers untouched, his silence sharper than any speech. They'll call it the silence that spoke for Africa. And in the final narration of that story, long after the politics fade, the message remains quiet, resolute, eternal. Empires crumble not when they are defeated, but when the oppressed stop fearing them. And on that day, in the heart of Africa, fear died. What rose in its place was something greater, dignity, unbought and unbroken.